Hello, everyone. Welcome. So we have a special treat for you this month. We have Annie Lighthart. She is the author of Iron String, beautiful book of poetry. She's also the author of Pax, with one of the most beautiful covers that I have ever seen, with a poetry book. And her poems have traveled all over the world. She is much beloved by me, many other folks like Evan Boland and Naomi Shihab. But we're just here to talk about the writing life. Annie will share some poems with us, and we'll just get to spend time with her this morning. So
Thank you.
welcome, Annie.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming.
It's a joy to be here.
Yeah, well, it's a joy to have you. And we've never met in person,
No.
even though I've included, I think, poems of yours in every single anthology that I've done. And loved your poems over the years. We've never met. We've never even met via Zoom. So this is a really special treat.
And yet you have always felt like kin.
Yes, yes. We've exchanged some letters, which definitely makes people feel like kin and family. And I appreciate you saying that, because I feel the same way. And I think, it's easy to feel like that about people who write from the heart, which I would say you do very, very much, but also write with such vulnerability. And it feels almost like you are sort of using your life as this material to draw from for your poems. Does that feel true to you?
It does, but it's only always after the fact.
Mm,
Usually the poems surprise me and I don't, they come from a place that's very mysterious to me. And it's only really afterward that I look back at them and I think, oh, that was me.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I felt that too. I'm glad you're talking about surprise, because it's been my thing for the past few months, just thinking about how um, it's so much better if you sit down to the page without any of that pressure, and
Yes.
just like, I'm open, I'm receptive, I'm ready to be surprised by whatever shows up. And with that intention, I am always surprised.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes
Mhm.
sharing things that I didn't even think that I would be willing to share.
Yes, that's it. Because when I was younger, I used to sit down and I would write, sorrow. And then I would prepare, I would sort of like prepare to write the poem. And then of
Right.
course it never materialized. It's only, I think, that when you do allow yourself that open space, that mystery of the blank page, and you can sidle into it.
Yes.
You
Yes.
can kind of look at it from the corner of your eye and kind of relax into that mystery. And I think that's when the surprising poems come.
Mm. I love what you're saying. Relax into the mystery. That's such a beautiful phrase.
It
Yeah,
takes
which
practice.
it's not easy. Like, we're both kind of,
Yes, it
yeah.
is not easy at all. And I think it was Mary Oliver who said, you have to keep showing up to the page because the muse will learn to expect you. But if
Mm.
you don't show up, then she'll be disappointed. And why would she stick around?
Right. Right. Move on to someone else who is available. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So how do you show up in such a vulnerable way? Like, what allows you to do that? Is it that sidling into it, and maybe even sort of taking a step back and saying, this is not me that's doing this, that it's just sort of passing through. How do you think about it?
Oh, what a beautiful question. I think I definitely don't think about myself.
Yeah.
It's almost the way I guess the way I would describe it is when I sit down to write, I'm almost pretending I'm not going to write.
Yes. I
I
can so
read,
relate.
I read something first and I keep a blank page, preferably one that's half size like this.
Mm.
So it's casual. It's not, a beautiful notebook. And then after I read something, poetry, somebody else's poetry, it's almost like I'm taking a breath and leaning forward, almost with sort of antenna. And
Mm,
and to think, like, if there was a word from what I had just written, I'll jot that down. Or if it reminded me of something, I'll jot that down. And those sort of invisible antenna are just pulling in. I don't want to sound too mystical,
go
but
ahead.
pulling in sort of resonances
Yeah.
from what I've read. And that's what the mystery is, that I
Mm,
don't, that blank piece of paper will hold just some sort of little scratches of words. And then gradually that will come into something else.
mm,
And my busy mind, my daily mind, I really set it over here.
yeah.
And my sort of questioning, wonder, quiet mind is on that little piece of paper.
Mm,
Really, the smaller, the better. The
yeah.
sort of the ugliest notebook, ugliest piece of paper that I can find is the one that I can sort of rest my mind on with ease and then see what happens. And
Mm,
I was just telling some students last night, it's usually on a day when I have written, say, 2 terrible poems, like
mhm.
really terrible, the ones I wouldn't even show my husband. He's my first reader. The ones
Yeah.
that I think, like, oh, this is it. This is the end.
You're
I knew
done.
what day was coming. And then I'll get up and I'll think, usually this is the way it happens. I mean, it has to happen, really terrible poems. I'll get up and I'll think, oh, what was that little phrase? And then I'll turn around and write. And that's sort of where the deeper poems come from.
Mm,
Once I'm in that quiet space of not me,
mhm.
of quiet, or I guess I should say I'm always there, but quiet me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like that you say the quiet space of not me, because it is you and it is not you at the same time. There's this maybe space in between where I think is the sweet spot. That's where the
Yes.
mystery is able to get in, because there's just that little bit of gap. And also I think writing something, I'm sure your terrible poem is, much better than I could do some days, but it's but I can relate to that too, because it almost seems like you have to get those out of the way, or just it's like a practice run to work yourself into that space of kind of greater patience, where you're willing to be surprised and you're willing to follow that resonance, like you were saying, that gets drawn in by the antenna. But the so-called bad poems are almost like your antenna are like slowly extending out. They're not quite there. This is my experience anyway. And then there is that bit of phrase or a few lines, or even just an image that just you can't quite let go of. And
Yes.
yeah, and then you follow that. And like I'm always sort of trying an image out in multiple forms. Like I have this image. I was taking a walk the other day. I was sort of down, and the ground here in Vermont was muddy, and then it, froze again, and it was just like, oh gosh, kind of ugly and brown. And I looked down and I saw these deer tracks that were imprinted in the mud, and of course they were sort of heart shaped and just
Yes.
with ice inside, and there was just something about it. And so I've been obsessed with that image, and that just came out on a little scrap of paper after I'd been working on my, serious poem or whatever. And so I love that you're pointing to that, just that, the smaller the paper, the better, the cleaner the notebook. That if we get too precious about it, maybe the muse will show up when we're there, but also can seize up if there's too much pressure.
Yes, I
Right?
love your phrase, the place of greater patience,
Mm,
because I think that's it. It really is a deeper, spacious place of patience.
Mhm.
And that we all do have that within us, and we all do live there at times, but we don't live in a culture that cultivates it or lauds it or encourages it in any way.
Right. You have to fight tooth and nail basically to enter that space and hold
Yeah,
on to it.
but poetry calls us there, I think.
Mm,
I think it regularly calls us there, whether in the reading or the writing.
mm,
I think they're both really beautiful, remarkable ways of entering that room.
mm. Yeah, I think, something that we often say when talking with people, because we all get asked a lot, and we ask ourselves, like, what do you do in those dry periods, or those periods of silence when it's only those bad poems or no poems at all are coming to you. And I think it was Naomi Shihab Nye who said, if you can't be a writer of poetry, you can be a reader, you can be a fan of poetry. And
Oh,
that's another way of inviting it back, extending those antennae, and inviting it back into the self.
yes, the reading of it is just as open a door as the writing of it.
Mm,
And I think, and it is that it is an invitation when you find a poet that you love and do a deep dive into that
mhm.
person's poetry rather, that you really can it opens up your own heart, particularly when you find someone that resonates with you.
Yeah,
I have great periods where all I want to read is Rumi,
yeah.
or all I want to read is Rilke. And they're like different flavors.
Hmm.
And I can go back in my life and I can think, oh, that's interesting that that's who I was reading right then.
Mm,
That I
yeah.
really needed that particular ingredient in my life.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and I like that you're saying it's not just in your poetry, but in your life as well. Like you needed that, whatever they were offering to kind of flavor the broth of that particular time in your life.
My life is a
Your
great
life is
broth.
a broth.
It
I
is.
didn't mean to imply that.
No, it is. It's very murky, but hopefully there's the health in there.
Well, I'm imagining like rich, golden, nourishing broth.
I love it. There's a
Yeah.
poem in that.
There is. Well, I've also been sort of obsessed with this word steeping. Like, we steep in certain things, drawing the flavors that we need, like a
Yes.
tea. And it's that same principle that you can. I feel like what you're saying is really to follow what is calling to you at a particular time, especially in terms of reading and writing, and that being this kind of unfailing guide for us that we can always fall back on.
It is. It's a
Yeah.
guide. It's a lovely sort of beckoning guide who's not
Mhm.
pushy,
Right.
luckily. Although sometimes it wouldn't be bad to have a little push.
No, I would love to be told what to do and how to do it sometimes. And I understand that would rob us of the fun of figuring it out on our own and going through, however many hundreds of drafts sometimes to get to where something needs to go. Yeah. Well, I would love to hear a poem right now if you'd love to share one.
Yes, I would. Um, Here's one when I was looking forward to today. I was thinking, I had this feeling of what you and Danusha have created is this kinship. And I felt like, oh, I found my people. And that
Yeah.
feeling, and I thought, oh, I know that feeling. And I once wrote about that feeling. And it's called A Great Wild Goodness. One morning, I was looking out the window when a great wildness came over me. I wanted to be kind to everything. I promised not to kill the spider on the wall. In the cold, I took the dog for the long walk she'd been wanting. I fetched a trash can lid for an ornery neighbor and did not just then add a single adjective to his name. I went back inside to the laundry and dishes with a clean heart such as I have never had. Before dinner, the wild goodness bellowed, "Too tame, too tame." So I went outside without my coat and shouted poems up the alleys until my children came home with their small, warm hands. Then we ate bread in the kitchen, unafraid to be happy. The stars in wild darkness were right over our heads.
So beautiful. Yeah, shouting poems down the alleys for sure.
My neighbors do think I'm a little bit odd anyway.
I also can relate to that. Yeah, yeah, and I also can relate to the orneriness of certain neighbors and townspeople that you refuse to add those adjectives to. Yeah. Yeah, so you see that poem as kind of announcing this greater kinship, this desire to sort of be kind to everything.
Yeah, and it came to me after I wrote it that there is both that, exactly what we were talking about earlier. There's this element of will to will yourself toward this life, but there is also this call that is greater than you, that you, once you will yourself toward it, it sort of pulls you further in,
Hmm,
just
I
like
love that.
poetry.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that there's almost this sort of meeting in the middle that, there's a certain amount of will, and then there's the call, and there's that invitation to go toward it. And it happens over and over. And it's sometimes the call is so quiet that it's very easy to miss, because as you say, our culture doesn't exactly set us up like, listen to those inner whispers. Never has a commercial ever told us that, like, pause, turn everything off, listen to those inner whispers. And yet I do feel like that's so much of what your poetry does. It's that great wild goodness that rises up, and that we're invited to listen to and follow in so many of your pieces. And kind of puzzling through these basic issues of life, like, what is love, in the midst of the craziness of every day and all the difficulty. What is love? Or, as you name it in one poem, tenderness. That you say
Yes.
that is maybe the best thing. That's Light Rain, right?
It is.
Yeah. Would you read that one? I'm going
I
to be
would love
selfish now and
to.
request. That's
And
on page 49 in Iron String.
I should say, I don't know if this has happened to you, but because we have the wonderful Powell's bookstore here in Portland, Oregon, and they sell new books next to used books. And I was in the poetry section and I saw my book and it was used. And I said to my husband, "Oh, somebody sold my book back. Somebody didn't want my book." And I said, "Oh, what if I wrote, like, to my best friend ever, thank you for buying this book." And he said, "Okay, I'll go and look at it first." And he pulled it out and he opened it up and he's like, "Okay, there's no inscription. It's all right. But I'm going to buy it for you because you need to have it, because
Oh,
you need to bring it home." So I brought it home and the person had written in it. And it was fascinating because they wrote little comments or they underlined lines. And in Light Rain, they underlined the word tenderness.
hmm.
And so I thought, oh, okay, it worked. They didn't want the book anymore, but they underlined that word. And then in the margin, they wrote tiny moments of contemplation. And I thought,
Wow.
oh, thank you for selling the book back because you just made my day.
Wow.
So thank you, James, for asking for this poem. I feel like it's like a recycled poem that has come back.
I love that. That's a great story.
Light rain. Stern voices in the world say they know what matters most, but I find I don't know anymore. Once I would have said it was love. It would have been so good, so fine to say, and I would have believed it was true. But this morning, the baby is screaming, and my son bitterly complaining, while their father, besieged, tucks and buttons their clothes. I take a spider outside in a glass and kneel in almost invisible rain until it climbs into the grass and is gone. Now I see it has been tenderness all along. Now I am ready to fail, to go back inside and begin it again.
Wow.
Thank you for giving that poem back to me.
Yeah, of course. Tiny moments of contemplation indeed. I love that story. I mean, it's hard to believe that someone who would underline tenderness and write something like that would sell back the book and really zero in on that poem. But I love that tenderness was underlined in that. I mean, it's almost, your story is almost a poem in and of itself, because it's like, this poem did its work and was then passed on, and then did its work back on you again, and
Yes.
gave a different sort of gift. So that's really beautiful. I've never had that experience. I've definitely seen my books sold back at bookstores, but I never had the lovely marginalia that you've had. And it does hurt. It does sting. Actually, when I lived in Portland for a couple of years, I think I had maybe a chapbook out or something at that point, and I did find it at Powell's Books, and I just thought, who sold back my book? It had to be someone I know, because it wasn't, widely distributed or anything like that. But mysteriously, there was no inscription, so I'll never know.
I did
Yeah.
go and I found a book that W.S. Merwin had signed to someone in a very specific location. And I immediately bought it and, brought it home. And I was like, W.S. Merwin touched this. And then I looked and I was like, and someone sold it? they sold Merwin's book back? So
Yeah,
poetry is just, I mean, it is lovely to have it endlessly recirculating, but I am not selling my Merwin book.
I don't blame you. That's one I would definitely hold on to, no matter what Marie Kondo says about simplifying your life. Hold on to the Merwin, because it does bring you joy, I'm sure.
It does. It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. So are you working on poems right now, putting together a new book, or just letting them slowly come as they do?
I am working. It's such a joy to be able to say yes to that question after so long.
Yeah.
I'm working on a book, and it's kind of writing me. And this is the first time in my life this has happened, where, because I do give into the mystery and I don't tend to control what I write, the poems are all about the body and the mind and soul.
Wow.
And so I have surrendered to that. And apparently this is what I need to be figuring out in my life. And so I'm working on a book called Brother Body, because I read this fantastic account of St. Francis of Assisi. He has sister moon, and he brought his brother and sister to all these parts about the earth, and he called his body brother ass. And because it disobeyed him and it was stubborn and he was so frustrated about it. And he was very hard on his body. He fasted, and he really did not take care of it until one of his fellow brothers came to him and said, Brother Francis, your body is also a holy place. And he then changed his attitude toward his body. And then brother ass became not a derogatory thing, but a loved thing. This strange donkey that we both walk in, and ride at the same time, has that transformation of thought really moved me. And it has gone deep. And although sometimes I do wish I would stop writing about body and mind and soul, it's what's coming out right now.
Yeah, it's not the easiest, lightest subject matter, right? Body, mind, and soul. But it's so necessary. I mean, I love that. I didn't know that about Saint Francis of Assisi, and yet it makes sense. I mean, it reminded me when you were talking about that of sort of how I treated my creativity early on. Sort of trying to whip it into submission, and working past all reason, and instead of just, like you said, letting the book write you, or letting a poem write me. I mean, it's a place of surrender, and it's such a gentler way of allowing creativity to move through us, and so much more spacious, I think, too.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful letting creativity move through us, because we're so used to controlling everything. And trying to, yes. And I just, my children, they say, like, the only thing we can't control anymore, and they say this with fear, is the weather. Like, I hope nobody ever gets control of the weather. And I think, yeah, I hope not. And I hope nobody ever gets control of our creativity, because it is this lovely, wild thing if we can let it be.
That's right. Yeah. And it's so embedded in the body. That's what I realize the more that I work and the older that I get, that, creativity is bound up in mind, body, spirit, all of it, heart, that there is no sort of separation. And, I can imagine that that's the trap that some folks, I'm thinking like monks, and like getting caught in this sort of mind-centered view of, this is how it must be, and having that contentious relationship with the body, instead of the welcoming, seeing it as a sibling rather than something to fight against.
It's this, because it is a strange thing. I mean, you can have this conversation between mind and body. They can be siblings and absolutely work together. And there doesn't have to be this strict dichotomy, which I think is what the poems were trying to tell me. That it isn't, it is one.
Yeah.
And it's also a hard thing to accept then, that it's one, when the body does grow old and have pain and disobey what the mind is telling it to do.
All right. Yeah.
And then there's the heart too, which is a different component of it.
Yeah. Do you think of the heart as, I know we're sort of getting into mystical territory, but
I love that.
Great, I do too.
Thank
That's my jam, absolutely. Do you think of the heart as being bound up with the soul or the spirit? That's a piece of that, or do you think of it as being its own thing? Because we do talk about creating or writing from the heart, um, but it does feel almost different than what we're talking about.
I do. I mean, the question of the soul is something that absolutely fascinates me.
Mhm.
I have for a couple of years now just been so hungry to learn what other people think about and about the soul and how is it approached, because you have the one side that says there is no such thing. You just have this really one organism. But then I think we have experiences where we are, the sum is greater than its parts. And that sum, that soul, I think the heart is part of that. I
Yeah.
think it is what we keep. It's interesting what you're saying about spaciousness. When the heart enters a more spacious place, I think then it's what is the soul. I mean, then
Mm.
it's sort of opening to that bigger
Right.
space.
Mm.
I don't think I think it can be separate
Yeah.
if we're, again, that if that will is exerting itself on it. But I do think there is this greater sum.
Mhm.
And I think that sum is so hard to I mean, I guess that's the kind of thing you have to look at with the corner of your eye to say,
Yes.
like, what is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like we can only ever catch glimpses of it, and I think that I'm so grateful that I'm a poet because I still can only catch those slivers or those glimpses of what it means to really enter that heart space that kind of leads you into the soul. But I do know what that feels like to just have the me, the not me, everything kind of coexisting at once, and yet being off to the side a little of
Yes.
of daily life. And I wondered too if the heart, we if we don't feel that as a conduit, this sort of connector between, body, mind, and soul, that it's this almost like a doorway, which I think is still what you're saying, that it's this space that we move into, to enter that space of the soul. Or I sort of call it like soul time, when you get into this space that's totally not moving it by clock time, that
Yes.
you're not really thinking about too much, that you're just in this state of more existence or something like that.
Yeah, that some people call flow.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think you're right. It is almost like opening that little door to the heart. It does. I'm imagining it now as like a heart with little shutters on it.
I
Or
love that.
little, blue Dutch shutters that kind of open up. And when you do open up that conduit, you feel that change.
Mm.
It's beautiful. And it's never
Yeah.
long enough, but it is but sometimes just to get that fingertip hold on it, you can say, like, okay, that was real.
Mm.
I felt something there.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, the heart with Dutch blue shutters opening up. And also, it makes me think that, sometimes we can will it open, and often it is like it just suddenly opens on its own through, that effort of writing into a poem, or feeling into a relationship, or just kind of sinking more deeply into a moment. There are lots of different ways to sort of get there, but it's not something that can really be forced either. That
No,
Yeah.
no, I think it can't. And again, it's one of those moments of gift. But if you make the decision to be open to the gift, not that you're, expecting, not that there's not that greediness, like when is the
Yeah.
gift going to come? But I think if you live more open-handed, and if you
Yes.
approach poetry more open-handedly, then I think something changes. Um, I have teenagers now. And I keep, they live in a very hard world. And we talk about like, you can bless the world or you can curse the world. And you can approach we talk a lot about this. You can approach the world with a fist.
Yeah.
And that feels much safer, or you can approach the world with an open palm. And that's terrifying.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you can't receive anything with a fist.
Mm.
And so I really feel like there's this way of being in the world, and poetry really asks you to have an open hand.
Mm.
And sometimes it is that place that you mentioned, that greater patience, that long time of sitting with your
Right.
hands in your lap.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. I'm just thinking, that image of a begging bowl, making the hands into this begging bowl. You have no control over what falls inside, what the world offers you. And monks who go around with a begging bowl make this pact, this vow to accept, if nothing falls into the bowl, which hopefully isn't the case, but if nothing falls into it, then that's what you get on that day. And I feel like we're making that same kind of sacred vow when we become creatives, when we become poets and writers, to just take whatever falls inside. And it's a bit of a scary prospect, really.
It really is.
Living like that, right?
It really is. It feels you are very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think about that word tenderness. You are also, that vulnerability does make you tender. I think it changes the way that I think it changes your eyes, the way that you look at other people and at life itself. And it softens you in a way that I think makes the acceptance paradoxically easier. Because you are softer and you are more vulnerable. And then that kindness, that tenderness comes in. And the creativity. And then you are so happy when you do get this tiny little poem.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Yeah. So grateful when those poems come. There was a poem of yours that is a favorite. It's the poem about the dust motes. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I do.
Yeah, I would love to hear that one.
Oh, thank you, James.
Yeah. I'm sorry I can't remember the title.
No,
Is it Let This Day?
Let This Day.
Yeah.
And because you were a friend to this poem, I think of this as your poem.
Oh.
And so I think of you and I as the dust motes. Now there's a strange compliment.
I love it. I love it.
So that sentence always needs to be put in context. So here's the context. Let this day. Let this day, born in sackcloth and ashes, shift. Let it change, rearrange. Let it come back made new and barking, snout pushed to table with joy. Let it wash us wildly with its tongue and shake its thick pelt. Let the dust rise off in waves, in solar clouds, and let our old selves float up in that haze, particles massed by the window, motes among 1,000 other motes. Now see our two. We are the two motes laughing as they leave, the two specks somersaulting right through the screen.
Still such a favorite poem. I love that poem so much.
I
am very happy to be a dust mote with you in this poem. For many different reasons. I mean, partially because it is such a beautiful, resonant poem, and I love that idea of, saying yes to joy and inviting that, and yet also like becoming so small, a speck that you're able to just float right through the screen. There's just such a freedom in that.
Yes.
Yeah, in the sort of vanishing of self and maybe even body that happens in that image.
There is. I was teaching last night, and we were writing about a poem. I bet you know. It's a Chippewa poem. Robert Bly translated it from a translation from Francis Densmore, and it's this tiny 3-line poem, and it says, "Sometimes I go about pitying myself, and all the while I am being carried by great winds in the sky."
Mm,
And I think, oh, yeah, that speck in such a huge space.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and just also, I'm a little obsessed with dust motes and how beautiful they are. And my to the point where my husband has told me, you are never allowed to write about dust in your poems again. Dust motes have made too many appearances, so you're not allowed to write about it anymore. But I'm not going to listen, because I do think they're so beautiful, and it's almost like we have these unseen parts of ourselves that are lit up in certain moments. Maybe those are the glimpses that we're talking about, and it's just like these shining instants, and then we sort of go back to being that small floating thing. I don't know, it's your poem really opens a door for me. I wonder if you remember how this one came to you. So give us like a behind the scenes for this one.
Oh my goodness. It's, some poems I can't, but I'm glad you asked about this one. It was very clear. You're in my dining room right now. I was sitting at this table. I was facing the window. The screen was open, and I had been in great pain. I
Mm,
had been in the worst pain of my life.
mm,
And I thought it was really a sackcloth and ashes moment. And I wasn't planning to write, but I was holding on to writing as a way through.
mm,
And so I would take a blank piece of paper and sit down when I could. And if I had to write about pain, I would write about pain. But that moment, the light came through, and I saw what you mentioned, the lit moment, that
mm,
the that what I was in, the air I was in, this this place of trauma and pain, suddenly this light came in and showed me what was there. And it was this moving, um this moving, these sort of waves of particles.
mm,
And I thought, oh my gosh, look at that. It's always here.
mm.
I'm always surrounded by these particles. I mean, sometimes horrified if
Right.
you
Yeah.
look up in the corners,
Yeah.
but yet they were lit. And I thought, okay, if you can, if a moment can be lit, if sunlight can come in, if you can write your way into that,
Mm,
then maybe you really can shift. And so it was really a plea, a prayer, let this day change. And it was a poem that came very quickly.
mm.
Like,
Yeah.
so grateful for those
I'm
poems.
sure you earned it, as we always
They are
do.
not all like that at
That's right.
all.
That's
It was
right.
just one of those miracle ones. I think I had steeped long enough. And really it that light and those molecules. And I remember, because the window was open, I could see them going out.
Mm,
And I thought, okay, what if you could just laugh? What if you could
mm.
have this moment of lit laughter? And I think
Mm.
laughter changes everything. Holy laughter, that is.
Right.
And that laughter that takes that little mote and says, yes, you are so wonderfully insignificant, even in your trauma. And
Mm,
yes, you know, you can be who you are, and you can be small, and you can still laugh and
mm.
leave momentarily.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
thank you for asking.
yeah, it's just so beautiful. I mean, I often approach poetry in that way too, that I'm really interested and fascinated by the ways that a poem can enact what we most need in that moment, a moment of uplift or, a little departure from the pain and trauma that's been so present. And it's this gift that they don't come often, but they do sort of come out of nowhere, and they come out of these moments of deep presence, which is definitely what I felt when I first read this poem. And I think we have all known those days that start off in sackcloth and ashes and, just seem so unbearable. And then it's usually these really tiny, small things that don't make everything better. They don't fix everything. And yet, on some level, they do, because they change us, they rearrange us, as your poem puts it so well.
That they're possible is, I think, another reason to keep that hand out, that they are possible.
Hmm. Wow. Well, I don't want to keep you for too much more of your time. I could keep talking like this literally for 2 more hours. But I love the idea of maybe ending on this poem, this beautiful poem, and also that image of the open hand, that, there is just that sense of possibility, which even a so-called failed poem can offer us, is reason enough to live with that vulnerably, completely open hand.
Yes, because even the failed poem is the voice speaking. It's the life living.
Mm.
It's totally worth it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself with us
Thank
for
you,
this
James.
time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for making this community.
Absolutely.